I cut her up into teeny weeny pieces. It just became a part of my life, says Henry Lee Lucas, explaining that he would kill his prey employing a wide variety of methods and then usually sleep with the dead bodies. In this case, the victim he was talking about was his young girlfriend, but she was only one body among many, according to Texas police. How many? 150? 300? 600? 3,000? Surely not. That would make him the worst serial killer in world history. He makes Charles Manson look like Tom Sawyer. Americans in the 1980s heard from their TV news media. Lucas, they heard, was the worst of all time, a man whose crimes were so utterly dreadful, the cops almost fainted when hearing about him. Soon, police from all over the U.S. were talking to him about these 3,000 possible victims and the depraved things he'd done to them. But was Lucas telling the truth? Were those investigators telling the truth? Or was this one of the biggest corruption and police negligence scandals in U.S. criminal history, possibly exposing parts of the police and the American justice system far more insidious than any single serial killer? This is a case with many twists and turns. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into Mr. Lucas, as deep as it gets, presenting you, we hope, with the truth and nothing but the truth. You're going to need to understand how this man's mind works if at the end of the show you want to be confident about your decision regarding Lucas's serial killer standing. What made this man tick? Just how evil was he? Did he show any of those typical behavior patterns of serial killers when he was young? So let's first have a look at his childhood. Warning, it's not a pretty story. Henry Lucas, the youngest of 9 kids, came kicking and screaming into this beautiful world of ours on August 23, 1936, born into a very noisy and busy one-room cabin in Blacksburg, Virginia, the once wild frontier back when the English colonists in the 1600s were making America their home while fighting the locals. Lucas's mom, Nellie Lucas, was of Cherokee Indian stock, while his father, Anderson Lucas, could no doubt trace his roots back to those wandering colonists. Still, this was not the kind of family to sit around a living room happily discussing their family tree. This was the family from hell, and that is not an exaggeration. Before we show you that, you need to hear some important facts and statistics about families from hell and what their offspring might look like. If you look at common factors attributed to all serial killers' lives, you find that one of the most common things they had was a severe lack of childhood bonding with their mothers. Babies, while not strictly conscious of their world, form about 50% of their life knowledge during those early years. They learn about smells and sights, they feel vibrations, sometimes of love, sometimes of hate. It's well known in psychological circles that depriving a baby of love and affection shapes their entire life. Neuroscientists talk about how what happens in this stage of life can affect how the brain develops. It can shape how a person trusts and how they feel love, sympathy, or remorse. Babies are a sponge, and if you feed them anger or resentment or deprive them of affection, they will likely one day either turn as hard as a rock or ooze out those negative feelings in a negative way. In an FBI study undertaken on serial killers, it was found that only 57% of them had both parents at birth. In 47% of cases, the father left before they were 12. 66% of them had very dominant mothers, and 44% reported they had a very difficult relationship with their mothers. We don't need to tell you this, but children need love, and they really need it from the person whose body they came out of. Still, 72% of serial killers in that FBI study said that they had a negative relationship with their father or another male figure charged with looking after them during their childhood. It's also worth noting 50% of serial killers had parents with criminal histories and 53% with psychiatric histories. Kids with criminal parents in that study were 4 times more likely to commit crimes than kids without criminal parents. The strange thing is, these kids were still 4 times more likely to commit crimes even if they were adopted into families with no criminal history. But the most important factor of all that trumps everything is that children who become serial killers often have traumatic childhoods. Deny a baby affection. Keep doing that as he ages. But throw in regular beatings, belittlings, and bullying, and you're giving your child a much higher chance of becoming a murderous maniac. As the British poet Philip Larkin put it, man hands misery down to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out early while you can, and don't have any kids yourself. Talking about his childhood, Lucas once said that he enjoyed hurting animals, killing them, and doing other things to them we won't describe lest this video breaches some YouTube moderation rules. Lucas said his stepfather taught him how to hurt animals, especially animals of the canine kind. Bearing in mind what we just told you, it's important to know Lucas's mother Nellie often made money from selling her body on the streets. She seemed to resent Lucas, calling him a sissy boy, severely humiliating him by forcing him to go to school dressed in women's clothes. He got much more than maternal emotional abandonment. He felt the full force of motherly hatred. Lucas would later say about his victims, "I just hate women." His father Anderson, aka No Legs, was a serial alcoholic. He was wheelchair-bound due to a drunken night out when he was hit on some railway tracks by a slow-moving train, after which his legs were amputated. Anderson found a few ways to make $1 or $2 from his wheelchair. He sold pencils, he skinned minks, but he also had an illegal booze distillery and sold his hooch around town while always having enough alcohol for his own dire needs. By age 10, little Henry already knew how to run a small alcohol plant from his shack. If food ran out, he and his father would sneak around at night, looking through people's trash. When Nellie's male customers came to the house, there weren't many places to hide. Rather than find this embarrassing, she, a powerful and dominant woman, did her job on the dirty floor. She made Henry watch. Anderson was often there too. If Henry refused to watch, she'd pull out the club that she often used to beat him with. In his own words, he once said, "I was dressed as a girl by my mother, and I stayed that way for 2 or 3 years. And after that, I was treated like what I call the family dog. I was beaten. I was made to do things that no human being would want to do." One of his earliest memories is of blood. He said a customer of his mother's had turned violent once, and she pulled out a gun and shot him in the leg with her shotgun. The blood went everywhere, including on Henry. He said this made him fascinated with blood. This was just one occasion where he experienced extreme violence from adults, and it was connected to sex, something that, as you know, happens in many serial killers' lives. When he was 13, his drunk dad went crawling around the house on what was a cold winter night. Lying there in the snow, he passed out and died. Lucas later said of his dad and how he'd felt about his mom having sex in front of him, she'd knock his brains out as soon as she would mine. He drank just to get away from it. He'd go out and lay in the snow to get away from watching her. That's what made him die. Nellie beat Henry even harder after his dad died, using broom handles and whatever else she could find. She'd beat him harder if he cried, all the time saying everything was his fault, that he was an evil child bringing bad luck to the family. One time, she beat him so hard over the head with a piece of lumber that she knocked him clean out. He spent the next few days in the hospital. Importantly, after this, he had regular dizzy spells and the odd blackout. This will soon become an important piece of information later. If you've seen a photo of Lucas, you'll know his left eye looked weird. That's because of the time he had a play fight with his brother, and his brother sliced his left eye with a knife. It couldn't be saved, so from then on, he had a glass eye. We should also add that prior to losing this eye, his mother ignored his injury for several days despite the eye looking really bad. If the story isn't already awful, the eye only came out after a teacher burst it by hitting Lucas with a ruler. We should also say the original injury was very likely an accident, not an all-out attack by his brother. With another brother, he had a sexual relationship. The two of them would also go looking for dogs to have their way with. Both boys were malnourished. They went to school and were pitied there by their teachers. One time, Henry came home with some shoes he'd been given in school as he'd gone to school shoeless. His mother took them off and beat the hell out of him for embarrassing her. Henry said the only thing he really loved in his childhood was his pet mule. His mother saw that, so one day she took her shotgun and made him watch as she killed it. She then gave him a beating and blamed him for the cost of someone being hired to haul the mule away. He once said in an interview, "My mother, if I had a pony, she'd have killed it. If I had a goat or anything like that, she killed it. She would allow me to love nothing. She wanted me to do what she said, and that's it." It all sounds unbelievable, like someone had invented the worst possible hell. But according to investigative historian and author of numerous books about serial killers, Peter Vronsky, Lucas's childhood history has been independently verified using various sources and interviews. Neighbors and people who knew the family have corroborated many of the events Lucas talked about. There were many witnesses to his mother's depravity. There were also the school teachers who agreed with Lucas when he said, "They ain't got, I don't think, a human being alive that can say he had a childhood like I had." Those school teachers confirmed that little Henry was sent to school in girls' clothes, something he obviously hated. It was later discovered that Nellie had done this so she could pimp him out in 2 different guises, therefore doubling the earning potential. There's more evidence of this. His shocked and saddened teachers managed to get a court order to stop his mother from doing it. Lucas said he was 14 when he killed his first person. She was a local girl, 17-year-old Laura Everline Burnsley. He picked her up, and when she rebuffed his advances, he strangled her. He later buried her body near Harrisburg, Virginia. He later said, I got to playing too rough with her. The pressure of seeing my mom hit me, and my emotions more or less took over and I couldn't quite handle it. Burnsley's body was never found. Keep that in mind as we go on. This event was in 1951 when Lucas was already forever in trouble with the local police for a string of petty crimes. In 54, he was sentenced to 6 years in the Virginia State Prison after being found guilty of committing numerous burglaries. 3 years later, he escaped prison while working on a road gang. He headed to his half-sister Opal's house in Tecumseh, Michigan, and 3 days later, he was recaptured and sent back to prison in Virginia. He was finally released in 1959, after which he went on to live with his sister again. Nellie called the sister's house almost every day, screaming down the phone, demanding her son come back to her to take care of her. She was 71, no longer capable of beating him. But a mother like that will always have a psychological hold over their victim. When Nellie went to visit them at Christmas time, she found her little Henry was with a woman named Stella. The two said they planned to marry. Nellie was furious. No one was good enough for Henry. He was hers. In January, Nellie was screaming at him when she hit him in the head with a broom. No more, he thought, no more. He picked up a knife and stabbed her in the neck. He later said, "I was pretty drunk when she started arguing with me, wanting me to go back and live with her in Virginia, but I told her I didn't want nothing to do with her." He said when he hit her, he didn't even notice he was holding a knife. She fell to the floor, and when he bent down to pick her up, he saw the bloody knife clasped in his hand. He thought that she was dead, but when Opal got to the house, she saw that Nellie, while lying in a huge pool of blood, was still breathing. Opal called for an ambulance, but Nellie passed away before it arrived. The official police report said Nellie had actually died from a heart attack, but that it was the result of her first being assaulted. Lucas fled but was soon picked up in Toledo, Ohio, on an outstanding Michigan warrant. A state trooper had pulled him over and got him on the warrant, and Lucas later confessed in jail to killing his mother. When he stood up in court, he told everyone in attendance about his childhood, about the many scars on his body that his mother had inflicted all those terrible years when he was her victim. Carol Durst, the defense attorney, argued that there had been no premeditation, malice, or intent to kill. Witnesses, some of the members of the Lucas family, stood up and testified to the hell he'd been dragged through during his childhood. Still, he showed no remorse at all. Durst later said she became quite disturbed at how he'd tell her stories about what he did to animals. Don't forget that either, his total lack of remorse. Lucas said he'd only acted in self-defense, but the jury was having none of it. He'd killed her all right, but they thought it was second-degree murder. He hadn't planned it, but he'd known his actions could have killed her. Judge Rex Martin convicted Lucas and sentenced him to serve up to 40 years at Jackson State Penitentiary in southern Michigan. Nellie, it seemed, was having the last laugh. Could his life get any worse? The answer is a resounding yes. It could get much worse. Lucas sat in his cell on many lonely nights thinking about how his life had gone. And on those nights, he took his shame and anger out on his own body. That's how he ended up in Ionia State Hospital, the mental ward, a place in those days, the 1960s, where men and women were unwitting victims of experimental psychiatric procedures. Lucas was knocked out cold with various antipsychotic medicines, and he had his brain zapped time and again in electroconvulsive shock therapy sessions. He became zombie-like, but he was harmless, it seemed. On his patient file, he was said to be a very inadequate individual with feelings of insecurity and inferiority. In 1970, only 10 years into his sentence, the state had to do something about overcrowding issues. Some men needed to be released early, and Henry, a nice guy it seemed, was released into the wilds once again. Could this man, with that kind of past, become anything close to an upstanding member of society? We think you know the answer to that, but figuring Lucas out wasn't so easy. He became a drifter, human sewage floating down the river of American society, a now violent, perverted human who, with an IQ of 87 and not much hope of landing gainful employment, was always going to infect wherever he went. In 1971, he tried to kidnap 3 schoolgirls, for which he was handed a 5-year prison sentence. The details about the crime are scarce, but we do know upon his release he went to Port Deposit, Maryland, where he stayed with his half-sister, Almeda Kaiser, and her daughter, Aomia Pierce. After just 3 days, he headed to Chatham, Pennsylvania, with Aomia and her daughter in tow. It was through Aomia that he met a woman named Betty Crawford. The two hit it off. At first, they were just friends, but on December 5, 1975, they got married. Lucas was 39. In time to come, police will say Lucas was somewhere else on December 5, 1975. You'll find out why. Lucas had many jobs, but failed to hold most of them down. It's reported he worked for a while at a mushroom farm. Still, he rarely made enough to take care of Betty and her 3 daughters from another marriage. They all lived in a trailer park and partly lived off of Betty's Social Security payments. This was far from a marriage made in heaven. In 1976, Betty accused Lucas of sexual misconduct in regards to her daughters, something Lucas denied. She kicked him out regardless, and on July 7th, he hit the road with his worldly belongings in a single bag. He drifted around the U.S., learning the highways and byways, something that police would later take much interest in. On his way to Florida, he stopped off at Tecumseh, Michigan to visit Opal, and later with his brother-in-law, Wade Kaiser, he went to Virginia. For months and months, he drove all over the U.S., stopping in Shreveport, Louisiana, often going back to Virginia and Maryland, onto Wilmington, Delaware, spending time in West Virginia working in a carpet store. In Hinton, West Virginia, the location of the carpet store, he met a woman named Rhonda Knuckles. But soon he was off again, later going to stay with his sister Alameda and getting his job in a wrecking yard. She later threw him out after accusing him of sexual misconduct with her daughters. At one point, Lucas borrowed a car from a friend and never returned. After reporting it missing, it turned up conked out in Jacksonville, Florida. Lucas was not far away, broke and hungry. He headed to a soup kitchen, and this is where something very significant happened. He met another drifter, a man who admitted to Lucas that he liked to dress up in women's clothes. His name was Otis Toole. Sometime in the near future, these two will be discovered talking about barbecuing humans, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Otis's childhood was one of extreme horror, involving chronic abuse of every kind you can imagine. He had epilepsy, had quite frequent grand mal seizures, and was endowed with an IQ of 75. He spent much of his traumatic childhood living in abandoned houses after running away from his mother and father, who both did terrible things to him. Unbelievably, Otis's father did what Lucas's mother did to him, which was make him dress in female clothes for his own sick kicks. All manner of people hurt him in ways too squalid to say here. But we will say that Otis developed his own sexual sickness as a result of this. These two men were two rotten peas in a diseased pod. Otis invited Lucas to stay with his mother, Sarah, and her husband, Robert, who all lived in the same house as Otis's wife, Novella, a nephew, Frank Powell Jr., and his daughter, 11-year-old Frida Powell, aka Becky. None of them was concerned about Otis's bringing home strange men. He was bisexual, and this happened often. He'd sometimes get off on watching these men sleep with his wife. This man was the ideal candidate for a friend of Lucas, whose life wasn't that dissimilar. Lucas still had problems holding down work. He did a stint in a paint factory. He later got severely beaten up and spent several weeks in the hospital. On his return to life at the Toole home, he got into the scrap business, but all this time he was getting closer and closer to young Becky. Becky was also a very low IQ and had been in trouble with the law. Their relationship was cut short for a while when Lucas was arrested for stealing that car we mentioned earlier, and Becky was sent to live with her real parents, only after being sent to a children's shelter in Bartow, Florida, after her mother died. She later ran away from the shelter and police suspected Lucas had picked her up. We're condensing a few years here from the late 70s and early 80s. All this time, Lucas and Toole drove around the U.S. They loved driving. Lucas held down work for a while at a roofing company, but according to Lucas's later testimony, the two would rob small convenience stores and sometimes even small banks. Lucas said they were hellraisers. One time, he said they tied up a woman in a convenience store in western Georgia and, pointing a .22 at her head, said, "Move and I'll kill ya." She didn't move, but as they walked away with the bounty, he noticed her slipping her binds. He calmly walked up to her and said, "I told you not to move," and subsequently fired a shot into her temple. Lucas would tell the police, "Now, see, that's the difference between me and Otis. He just kills him when he feels like it. At least I warn him first." He would also say that while he was loading the stolen booze and the food into the car, Toole did terrible things to her dead body. Lucas would say the two often did this with their victims. We say victims in the plural. This was a few years of activity, by Lucas's account, activity of the utmost depravity. It included doing hits for what Lucas would later say was a bona fide American death cult he said was called the Hands of Death. We've left quite a bit out here, but we think we'll come back to that part of the story later. We'll say that in 1981, a young boy was playing Atari 2600 with other boys in Sears in Hollywood, Florida. 2 weeks later, his severed head was discovered in a drainage canal alongside the Florida Turnpike. This was massive news in the U.S., painted across every family's TV screen. It was one of those crimes that could make someone notorious. According to Lucas, Becky would often sit in the car when the two were getting down to their depraved business. At the start of 1982, Becky, now 14, was on the run from child welfare authorities. One day, Lucas put her in the car and the two headed to California. Toole told Lucas they'd meet up later and continue their activities, some of it involving hits for the death cult. Lucas would later say he and Becky did not have a sexual relationship, but one time after he slit a man's throat, she became sexually excited and the two hugged and kissed. Becky had seen everything, including the dismemberment and burying of bodies. This was even before they got to California. According to Lucas, he took Becky on a veritable ride into American hell, showing her things no girl should ever see as they passed through Oregon and into Washington. He would later say when he read about the Green River murders in the newspaper from the Green River Killer, he and Becky went out and murdered several prostitutes. When they finally got to California, they met a man named Jack Smart. He owned an antique shop in a small township named Hemet. Smart took pity on the bedraggled-looking pair. His wife later described him as one-eyed drifter with his child bride. Still, Smart fed them and gave them a bed to sleep in. The Smarts got them a place to stay, and Lucas worked hard as a kind of handyman for Smart. Smart would later note that Lucas often went missing in his car, presumably enjoying life on the road. After a few months, the Smarts got news that their 82-year-old relative Katie Kate Pearl Rich was not very well. The lady lived alone in Ringgold, Texas, but as of late she'd become unable to take care of herself. The Smarts had an idea. Why not send Lucas and Becky over there? They could look after Kate and live rent-free, and everyone's a winner. While Kate fed them, housed them, and gave them free cigarettes, Lucas was soon spending much of the food money Kate gave him on booze. He'd turn up at the local store whose owners knew Kate well and buy stuff they knew Kate would never buy while cashing checks in Kate's name. The clerk soon called some of Kate's other relatives in Oklahoma, after which they arrived at the house. It was filthy, littered with unwashed clothes and cigarette packs, and there was a sink piled high with dirty dishes. Becky and Lucas were out on the couch happily dozing. They were soon handed some bus fare and told to scram, but Lucas told Becky they'd keep the money and hitchhike. That's how they met Reuben Moore, a preacher from nearby Stoneburg, Texas, who was the Pentecostal minister at a religious commune called the House of Prayer. He took them in and gave Lucas a job as a roofer. There was one condition: Lucas had to work and Becky had to learn to cook, sew, and clean. They also both had to agree to attend church services. Becky apparently changed her ways. As they'd not traveled far, she was still able to see Kate, but this time she really did do the work. Then one day she told Lucas that since she was now a good Christian woman, she would repent for her many sins. She told him she was going to head back to Florida and hand herself in to the authorities, who were still looking for an escaped child. She said she'd say nothing about him or what happened with Otis. She just wanted to come clean and lead a more righteous life. He said the least he could do was go with her, especially since she was planning to hitchhike, which was dangerous for a 15-year-old girl. Now let's skip a bit of the story. On June 10, 1983, Texas Ranger Phil Ryan arrested Lucas on charges of unlawful possession of a firearm. This was not out of the ordinary for Lucas, who had firearms charges in the past. Little did Ryan know at the time that Lucas had been in custody earlier after a car he'd been known to be driving was found by the California Highway Patrol. There was blood on the seats, which Lucas said was his. Prior to this, the relatives of Kate had contacted the local sheriff, Bill Hound Dog Conway, saying Kate was missing and that she'd been seen with Lucas. The cops interviewed Lucas, but in the end they had nothing to keep him in custody, and off Lucas drove, heading through New Mexico back to Oklahoma and on through Missouri, Indiana, and Illinois, where he would later say he held up convenience stores and killed anyone that stood in his way. Lucas drove and hitchhiked his way around, at times getting odd jobs, but in the end he contacted the House of Prayer by phone and said he wanted to come back. He told the minister that he'd been trying in vain to find Becky, who'd gone missing. At this point, the minister was aware that Lucas now might be involved with the disappearances of two women, Kate and Becky. He called Sheriff Conway, and they hatched a plan to bring Lucas back to the House of Prayer. The minister sent Lucas $100 and told him to come over. He was missed, said the minister. It was some days after Lucas's return to the House of Prayer that the minister saw Lucas had a gun. Now there was a reason to arrest him. Conway believed that Lucas definitely had something to do with these missing women, but he needed an excuse to bring him in. A phone call between the minister and Conway led to Lucas being arrested again. Something had changed in Lucas, this time in jail. Maybe he felt it was the end of the line. He'd run so much and perhaps he could run no more. In that cell, he wrote a letter addressed to the sheriff. It included the lines, "I have killed for the past 10 years, and no one will believe me. I cannot go on doing this. I also killed the only girl I ever loved." In Lucas's attempt to spill the beans, he explained that he'd been drunk one night with Becky, and the two had gotten into a fight over where to go and what to do. "That was it," Henry told the cops. "I just stabbed her with my knife. I just picked it up, brought it around, and hit her right in the chest with it. She sort of sat there for a little bit and then dropped on over." He then went into graphic details about, how do we put it, having relations with her corpse. He said he took a ring off her finger, chopped her up and put the pieces into pillowcases. He explained that he'd killed so many times before, but this one murder was different. He claimed to have loved Becky. He said her voice from the grave haunted him. But what happened to Kate? When Lucas returned to the house of prayer, people soon started asking where Becky was. The one person who asked that the most was Kate, who had taken a liking to Becky after seeing her conversion. She called Lucas at the house of prayer, and Lucas and Kate arranged to meet in town, and he'd explain the whole story. He told Kate that Becky had just taken off when they stopped at a truck stop in Texas. Kate, knowing Becky's transformation and plans, didn't believe him. She kept questioning him in the car when he was taking her back to the house. That's when he snapped. He pulled down a dark dirt road, took out his knife, and stuck it into her chest. He did his thing with the corpse and then dumped her, returning later with garbage bags and a knife. He said he cut her up and buried the bags, then returned to the house of prayer. A problem for Lucas was the minister now knew who the last person to see Kate alive was. You already know the minister will later inform the cops about Lucas's gun. You also already knew that the car he dumped was found with blood on the seats and that police had already picked him up before and had let him go, but now in his jail cell he was admitting to the murder and giving all the details. The only problem was, even though Lucas could take them to see body parts, the coroner couldn't positively identify either of them. Even so, it had to be him, surely. How else would he know where to take the cops to find their buried body parts? Lucas was talking, and by God could this man talk. The so-called legendary Texas lawman, Jim Boutwell, was the sheriff. He seemed to treat Lucas like a son, giving him daily milkshakes, steaks, and a seemingly endless supply of cigarettes. Lucas looked up to him like a father, and let's remember here that Lucas had never in his life been shown maternal or paternal love. Now he was the apple of someone's eye, so he talked and talked for Boutwell. Lucas explained what we missed out on earlier, that he and Otis had gone on an almost countrywide killing spree, murdering for fun, money, and for the death cult. Lucas sang like a canary, admitting to hundreds of murders. At this point, Toole was already in custody elsewhere. Cops had him on a murder charge unrelated to the alleged mass murders he'd done with Lucas. Toole then told the police it was he who killed and decapitated little Adam Walsh, the boy who went missing from the Sears store. We should mention again that Toole had a very low IQ. He was, in fact, quite a few sandwiches short of a picnic, as the saying goes. Lucas backed Toole up, saying yes, Toole killed the kid. There was meager hard evidence, though. In terms of Toole's alleged crimes, which he perpetrated alone, the evidence was weak and would remain weak. As for the hundreds of murders that Lucas told cops they'd both committed, Toole denied it at first, but later changed his mind. The two men were suddenly famous, receiving more attention than they could have dreamed of. They were treated like rock stars, not even handcuffed when interviewed, and always able to get hold of cookies, snacks, and drinks, and enough cigarettes to fill the shelves of a convenience store. Lucas described how they'd driven from state to state, slitting throats, shooting people, almost always doing things with the bodies. He later said he and Otis had parted ways, and he carried on killing, picking up hitchhikers, meeting women in bars, and in his own words he said, "I killed him every way there is except poison. There's been strangulations, knifings, there's been shootings, there's been hit and runs. I didn't have any emotions. I had no feelings for the people themselves or any of my crimes." One time he and Otis got on the telephone and started talking about drawing blood from victims and then barbecuing the body parts that tasted just like meat. Low IQ or not, they must have known someone was listening in. Clementine Schroeder, aka Sister Clemmy, would go to Lucas's cell at the behest of the cops, and the next day he'd be back with his milkshake and new pack of smokes, telling the police about more murders. At first it was like 150, then it went to 300, then 600. One time he said he'd killed 6 in one day. That was his record. He'd even said he'd killed government officials, and there was a little black book somewhere with all the details. The U.S. News was then telling folks at home that what cops had on their hands was not just the worst serial killer in U.S. history, but the entire world, hands down, the devil incarnate. The Lucas Task Force was set up by the Texas Rangers, along with the Texas Department of Public Safety, a department you should not forget the name of, as soon we'll have a lot to say about them. The task force was headed by Sheriff Boutwell, who was now looking like the cat that got the cream. He'd stand for photos with his fancy gun and his engraved handle, often being called the best cop in America. More cops came from all over the U.S., clearing murder cases every time they talked to Lucas. Homicide departments from Virginia to Florida to Texas were having the time of their lives. It looked like a TV game show called Clear the Case. They'd take Lucas to the crime scenes, later telling the press that Lucas had explained to them things only the culprit of the murders would know. Lucas had a lawyer who watched as his client dug his own grave. He later said it was maddening working for someone who was actively working against you. That's because the lawyer knew for a fact much of this made no sense. Becky and Kate made sense, but not the others. This talk about a death cult, about eating people, it all sounded like the mind of a fanaticist who for the first time in his entire life was getting some attention. Lucas obviously felt like he was worthy of respect and that he was doing something good. Later, a journalist named Hugh Ainsworth did his own investigation. He looked at the cases, he interviewed the families of the victims, he even spoke to Lucas, who he said privately told him he was lying but he wanted to die. Ainsworth wrote all of this down in a story that would itself become famous, showing how if Lucas had done what the cops had said he'd done, he would have had to be driving 24 hours a day. In a beat-up car, he was covering thousands and thousands of miles, not stopping, and then after one murder doing the same again and again and again. Lucas covered more distance than if he'd driven to China. It was physically impossible for him to have killed all the people the police said he killed. Then it became clear. It was seen in a video that the police had given Lucas a huge book to look at. The book was full of crime scene photos, dates, names, places, and bodies. Lucas would get some time with this, and he'd start talking about his crimes. He might have been slow, but his memory was good. He'd been taught how to confess, how to run through all the details. So had Toole, it seemed. But he would later die from cirrhosis while in prison, so his story stops here. In a strange way, these two men probably loved each other. They had photos of each other on their cell walls. They were also maniacs, but were they as bad as was being reported? After Lucas admitted to killing a woman known only as Orange Socks due to her body being found wearing orange socks, Boutwell even admitted he'd refreshed Lucas's memory. Then a roofing company supervisor named Fred Ellis came forward and said there was no way Lucas could have killed Orange Socks. He said Lucas was working that day in Florida, far away from Texas. He had Lucas's clock-in card. He had his signature. Other people came forward too. Far from being a loner, many people knew Lucas. They'd also said he'd seen him that day. How was he supposed to travel 1,100 miles in a day and be back for work the next morning? Even so, the police still said his stories checked out. Families, for the most part, hated the press for saying Lucas might not be some record-breaking serial killer. They wanted closure. Lucas's lawyer knew the only way to turn this around was to get Lucas to take the stand. Lucas agreed, but the next day he changed his mind. The lawyer said someone had got to him. Lucas was a killer, but what kind of killer was the question? Was he an Attila the Hun, or was he just a sad, traumatized, attention-seeking man with a low IQ, vulnerable to smart cops who needed to clear cases? The TV news wasn't really asking that question. News reports would flash up saying Lucas was telling police, details so exact authorities found it frightening. Maybe so, but after they'd given Lucas the details. The distinction matters, although the TV media would not have known about that part. Joyce Marie Lemons, the mother of murder victim Debbie Williamson, was irate. She knew very well this was not the truth. She and her family knew the cops were lying. They spent years doing their own investigation and figured out that Lucas was in a different state at the time Williamson was brutally stabbed and killed. They found out that Lucas had been shown photos of the murder scene prior to him admitting to the crime. "We were mad. We went straight to the media," they said. Their investigation was sound. There was no way Lucas could have killed their daughter. Even Betty Crawford came forward saying Lucas was down for one murder on the day they got married hundreds of miles away. Remember December 5th? How had the police missed such huge details, like when and where he got married? It was as if they weren't trying because they wanted to close cases. The Lemons family found out that Lucas was in a different state for another of the murders. They interviewed many people and discovered that these people who had been with Lucas could prove it and sometimes had documents to show it. These people had never once been questioned by the police. The Lemons sought to take their case higher. There was hope when Vic Feazell, the district attorney in Waco, Texas, got involved. He could not believe his eyes. He soon started investigating the case himself. Meanwhile, Lucas, now serving a death sentence, started saying he hadn't committed those crimes and that the cops had fed him all the information. As Feazell was getting ahead with his investigation, the Texas Department of Public Safety, headed by a man close to the top dogs in the FBI, defended the Texas Rangers. This man, James B. Adams, was a former acting director of the FBI. He had a lot of political power, and he didn't like the fact that his Texas Rangers were being badmouthed. One day, Sheriff Boutwell, agents from the FBI, and the head of the Texas Department of Public Safety all had a secret meeting. This would not come out for quite a while. What was discussed at the meeting is still a mystery, but you can take a guess. Soon, Feazell found his house was illegally wiretapped. His dog, who barked at the wiretappers, was killed. He received phone calls at night saying he was going to be taken out. His wife once said someone called and said, "We have a bullet with your name on it." Someone in high places wasn't happy. Feazell was about to expose one of the biggest scandals in U.S. law enforcement history, but before he could do that, police raided his house one morning. They went through everything, took all of his documents, found a toy plastic syringe from his son's play doctor kit, and noted it as narcotics paraphernalia. You could almost hear the booming voice of the shadiest part of U.S. law enforcement and justice saying, "This is what you get when you mess with us." Feazell was released on bail after being charged with accepting bribes from attorneys. Even though he was innocent, somehow the FBI got hold of documents that stated he'd taken the bribes. Some attorneys had turned on Feazell, probably in fear of their careers. Feazell was looking at 80 years in prison for bribery, racketeering, and other charges. He later said, "I could not believe the U.S. justice system could do this." Of course, people asked if it had anything to do with the Lucas investigation and the fact that Feazell was about to expose it, but the district judge reminded people there was no link. No, nothing like that. To cut a long story short, Feazell was found innocent. The bad apples won. Feazell later found out through investigations and Freedom of Information requests that he'd been set up, that some people that had went against him had gathered their evidence from a WFAA TV expose. Feazell later took his case to trial and was awarded $58 million judgments for libel charges against WFAA TV, which at the time was the largest libel judgment in U.S. history, later to be settled. Feazell was done with the justice system. He'd lost all faith in it and so retired. But his and others' work proved that Lucas could not have committed all those crimes. It was now obvious the Texas Rangers had lied, although they still denied it, only admitting to some sloppy police work at times. They still had convictions for 11 homicides, including those of Kate and Becky, and importantly, they had Lucas on orange socks. Lucas was still going to be executed, even though it was now evident he couldn't have possibly killed Orange Socks because he hadn't even been in the same state. Lucas was definitely a liar, he was definitely violent, and he was definitely sexually perverted, but it was starting to look like he was no serial killer. Texas Governor George W. Bush finally stayed his death sentence when it was obvious to anyone who cared to look that Lucas had not killed Orange Socks. It was discovered that not only had Boutwell fed him steaks and milkshakes, but Lucas had some kind of nervous breakdown while in jail, and then he'd been given lots of strong medications at the time he was talking about murders and death cults. He then underwent extensive neurological tests, which showed his brain was damaged. There was extensive damage to his frontal and temporal lobes, which might explain his strange behavior. This could have happened when he was beaten as a kid, as it was found out he'd had seizures after one of his mother's beatings. Researchers said such abnormalities might also have something to do with childhood malnutrition. CAT scans revealed that his brain defects were consistent with diminished control over violent impulses. Then there was the story of Rita Salazar and Kevin Key, two youngsters who had been brutally killed. Lucas had been accused of their murder and admitted to it at the start, yet DNA evidence, which then was quite new, showed it to be a different man, later arrested and convicted. There was also Betty Thornton, a murder which Lucas admitted to, so the man charged with her murder, Scotty Scott, son of a policeman, walked free. It couldn't have been Lucas, as it was later shown he wasn't even in Texas. He was in Florida at the time of the murder. Scott was retried, but the case against him was dismissed. There were other cases when Lucas knew all the details, such as a necklace worn by a woman, but it turned out it couldn't have been him. So how did he know such specific details about the murders? The families of the victims saw this on TV and realized they'd been mad at the wrong man. Many came forward. The Cold Case Foundation got involved and did its own investigation, showing how utterly ridiculous the case was against Lucas. They said the only pattern was there was no pattern. No consistency, no pattern, no modus operandi, no signature, no hard evidence, just the words of a fanaticist with a nightmarish life story. The foundation presented a 32-page report to the Texas Rangers showing their findings, but received no response. DNA evidence had proven Lucas could not have murdered 20 of the people his name was tied to, but they had him tied to 3,000 cases. For the people he was convicted of killing, even Kate and Becky, whom he probably did kill, there's never been one scrap of evidence outside of his confession. He might have killed some people close to him, maybe not. In 2019, Orange Socks was identified through DNA as Deborah Jackson. She'd been murdered, but with high probability not by Lucas. It was the same as thousands of other cases, but if Lucas hadn't killed those people, who had? Police wouldn't reopen most of those cases, although over the years some have been reopened. Police departments now know huge mistakes were made here, perhaps just through willful blindness rather than rampant corruption. In detective circles, they now call this Henry Lee Lucas syndrome. Be careful what you wish for, they say, when things look too good. Don't believe everything you hear, even if believing it makes your life easy. On March 12, 2001, Lucas died from heart failure. He was 64. Right up to his death, he told lies, lots of them. But he might well have been telling the truth when he said, "I am not a serial killer." Now you need to watch My Nice Neighbor, Serial Killer, True Crime, or have a look at how they caught Ted Bundy day by day.